this story that we're living in, this system that we've created, this profit at all costs, this more and more and more and more and more, buy, this whole thing, not only is it in very real ways destroying parts of the world, it's not making us happy. That was what kept me up at night the most.
Andrew Morgan is the documentary filmmaker behind The True Cost and After the End. A lot of creatives get caught up on the how. How am I going to make this project happen? How will I get funding? How will I finish it? Instead of getting caught up on all the details, Andrew found stories that he couldn't not tell. That drive pushed him to tell the stories behind the sudden death of his father and the unexpected cost of consumerism. My conversation with Andrew will challenge you as a creator and get you to think differently about the choices that you make every single day. I'm really excited to share this podcast episode. But before we do that, before we get into our conversation, a couple housekeeping items. I'm starting to take questions on this podcast. The most common emails that I get are from creatives asking me about their specific struggles. These questions are detailed and specific, and I think answering them on air will really help a lot of people. It's been amazing to see your voices, and one of the best things about growing this podcast over the past year has been hearing from you guys, hearing from what you're going through. Somebody emailed me recently telling me about a documentary that they were starting. It was their first one, and they were just so overwhelmed and didn't know where to go and where to take it. And I want to give, I think that answering that question will be better suited on a platform like this podcast, where even more people can get the benefits of the answer. And since I am not the smartest, I don't know everything. I struggle with a lot of these questions myself. One of the best things about the podcast is also the fact that I get to pick the brains of some brilliant people. But I want you guys to be able to pick their brains as well. So send your question in, record a video, send it to hello@mattdiavella.com. And then myself, as well as my guests, can help you get to the bottom of whatever you're struggling with. Again, that's hello@mattdiavella.com. If you don't know how to spell my name, which I don't blame you, I'm still learning how to spell it myself. It's Mattdav, as in Victor, ELLA. Try to keep those videos to under 2 minutes, but that's it. Nothing else. You can curse, you can say whatever you want. Let me have it. So one more thing. Have you gotten some value out of the Ground Up show? If so, I'd love to get a quick rating from you. Head over to iTunes, leave a rating or a review. They really help to boost the visibility of the show. I want to do my best to keep this podcast 100% advertisement free. And to do so, I really want to grow it and share these stories with even more people. That's that, and that's the end of my pitches. Let's get to the podcast. This is Andrew Morgan. You're listening to The Ground Up Show, a podcast that inspires creatives to make meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name's Matt Diavella, and I'm a filmmaker best known for the Netflix documentary Minimalism. And I'm sitting down with creators to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact. You want to start this thing?
Yeah, let's do it.
You've been busy lately. You're working on a new film, right?
Yeah, we have a new one that's going to be coming out this spring that we're actually just finishing up on right now.
Is that something you can talk about, or do you kind of keep your projects hush-hush until they're ready to promote?
Yeah, I haven't talked about that one, but yeah, it's a film called The Heretic, and it is all about specifically the life and work of a guy named Rob Bell, and it uses his life kind of as a lens through which to look at religion and most specifically Christianity in America right now. And it's something that I started working on a couple years ago. We started shooting the end of 2015, which is interesting only because it was before 2016 happened. And so the film sort of took this really significant turn, as a lot of things in our country took a turn in 2016, and kind of all the knobs got turned up on religion and politics and all that stuff. So we were following this guy in the midst of all that, who's incredibly controversial, probably one of the most revered and hated people in all of Christianity. Certain people wouldn't claim him in that circle.
Is that why he's and by the way, Rob Bell, the one that's a native Californian here.
Yep.
I just bought my mom his book, What is the Bible?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We're talking
Same
about
guy.
the same Rob Bell.
Yep.
Because I hadn't heard that there was controversy surrounding him. Is that controversy from Christians?
Yeah. Back in, I think, 2011, Rob put out a book called Love Wins. And that book created a lot of waves because he kind of took on the traditional notion of hell. And it became... it was a Time magazine cover. It became this hugely controversial thing because I guess in a lot of ways he was sort of pointing out the contradictions or the problems with like a very binary, some would say regressive view of the afterlife. And to a lot of people in that Christian community, that was, certainly heresy. And he just, he became a target for a lot. And I think he kind of became a really interesting picture of like what happens to someone when they challenge the community that they're a part of. Do they sort of get slapped on the wrist and go back inside the tribe, or do they keep moving and keep growing and keep going forward? And Rob certainly did the latter, which made him someone who was just really fascinating to me for a lot of reasons. I grew up in that. I've always been interested in religion and the way it impacts society, but specifically as we came into 2016 and just beginning to realize, like, I don't think you can understand America without understanding religion and the way it has kind of like the American story and the Christian story have kind of commingled into something really unique. As I traveled in parts of the world, like that's a very unique phenomenon that we have. So anyway, we've been doing that and we are just finishing it up and it's going to come out this spring. So it's exciting.
Dude, I'm excited for that. I've been following Rob Bell for my friend Josh, who is in the documentary Minimalism. He's really a big fan of Rob Bell and he does a lot of workshops and talks, and Josh, being somebody who's non-religious, is what kind of got me interested in him, because I'm like, all right, like Josh is an atheist or at least agnostic, and yet he's getting a lot of value from this guy. So for me, I was like, oh, I'm interested in it. And I just started reading one of his books. It's like Be Here Now. He's written a lot of books. I'm really interested to see how this story unfolds, because he's definitely
that's what and that's what you realize following Rob around, is like that his world is so weird. Like the people that are coming to his events and the people that are reading his books, like they are they're just all over the map, and I don't know, it kind of speaks to this bigger idea of a group of people who sort of outgrew a traditional religious way of looking at the world, but are still really hungry for meaning and depth, and still haven't written off the idea that there's more than we can see and touch and smell, that there might be some glue in the universe. There might be something that's moving us forward. So he's just a fascinating dude.
Yeah. So when did you get into filmmaking? When was when did it all start?
It was pretty simple for me. I mean, I grew up, I remember really specifically, I think I was in 5th grade and I pulled out a VHS camcorder in my house and started making some movies in the neighborhood. I used to make skateboarding videos and stuff in the...
Oh man, you know how many filmmakers probably got started out making skateboard videos?
Well, and that was the height. I mean, I think, there was some really good, like Spike and Michelle Gondry. A lot of those guys were doing some stuff then that I think was pretty phenomenal. I started doing that, and then I started editing, VCR to VCR, and then I started, I remember getting a computer that had a video card for the first time and being able to upload footage, and it took days to just get footage imported.
It was like you had to literally wait. So if you shot 10 hours of footage, you had to wait 10 hours as it
That's right.
uploaded.
And usually it crashed.
And usually it crashed halfway through, and then you got to redo it all. Were you using, what was like the editing application early on?
Yeah, I was working. I remember the first computer we had in our house was a Sony Vaio, which was like
that was fancy when it came out.
Yeah, it was. Well, that was the problem. It was it was trying to do more than the technology supported. Right. So it actually had a video card that had like an RCA input on the front, which looked so cool. Wow. You were like, oh my god, you just plug right in.
Yeah.
And it didn't work too well though.
Shit. Yeah.
But I don't know, because I got on Premiere pretty early, but I think before that it was. There were some other ones first that were just horrible.
I just used like Windows Movie Maker.
Yes, that was one of them.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. It was so bad.
It's terrible.
But I mean, that actually taught me is like, don't try to do anything fancy. Don't play with those crappy transitions. Just go straight cuts, and then you can make a decent video. Of course, like everybody when they're first starting out, that's the first thing they do is like, I want to do something that other people would be impressed with. So you do like the star wipe and all that stuff.
Were you doing stuff really young too?
Yeah, man. I started, I want to say, well, actually, dude, I did a lot very similar to you. It was like grabbing my parents' VHS. I was a younger brother. My older brother and older sister at the time would like play around with it and make these videos. My older brother would make these stop animation videos with a VHS camera.
Oh, wow.
We would do like horror movies. I wasn't into horror movies, but they were. So we would do these, like, I would be like the villain, the slasher in the movie, and we would make these little clips. I don't think we have them anymore. And then that, I think, got me interested in it. I was like, this is really cool. Then our VHS recorder broke, and then we couldn't make any videos for a while. But when I went to high school, just very, very lucky to have like a really great program there at the school. We had like, there was like 15 computers, all with Final Cut 7 on it, Apple computers. I couldn't afford any of this gear. I think my parents helped me buy a Sony Handycam early on. So I would like shoot videos with that, and then I would bring it into school and edit during lunch and during my free periods. So it's like, that's when I got started, and then I just never stopped from high school.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Is that, so how did your
Yeah, I mean, similar. Yeah, I mean, I got really hooked. I mean, I think when I was in sixth grade, I remember like making some decision to be a filmmaker, you know, like whatever that meant at the time. But I remember being like very clear about that. And I think everything in my life, as complicated as it has been, that's never been the hard part, you know? Like I was very locked in. I remember watching E.T. like as a kid and just thinking like, this is something. I just remember thinking it was powerful, like really, really powerful, and I just wanted to do it. I mean, it was like really that cut and dry. So I was a bad student. I was bad at just about everything in like academically speaking. So I remember really early on realizing I could go to a film school and not have to get like a certain, you know, level on SAT or get into some. And that was like, oh, you know, the door had opened. So I finished high school, and I came out to Los Angeles. I remember to go to the LA Film School and study cinematography. And that was really, I mean, that was just like when all the lights turned on. I mean, it was the first time I was ever in an environment where I just felt like myself, you know, like I did really well. It came really naturally. I just was all the hands-on parts of the cameras and the lights and the gear and I just absolutely loved it. And I had one of those years that just like changed my life because I was studying and we were making stuff. And then I also got really connected to some of the professors. So we would go on set for some of their movies and I traveled and it was just like totally intoxicating.
Yeah. I wonder if there's like, obviously a lot of people talk about how the system is kind of outdated, the education system. Yeah. And I wonder if it's just such a hard thing to try to come in and fix. But it's like a lot of the times we're putting kids through these classes and general requirements that they don't need to be taking. I didn't go to film school, but my last 2 classes in college, I had to take them to graduate. So I had to stay an extra summer. It cost $10,000 and the classes were algebra and weightlifting. And that's what I needed to take in order to become a professional filmmaker.
What like how did you have to pass the weightlifting class? Yeah. Was it a threshold of like
I had to bench press? No. So it's funny. Well, it wasn't like, it was actually just a physical education requirement, sure. But I think it's just funny that I decided to take weightlifting. But it's just kind of shows that it's like, well, why did I need to do that? Why did I need to say an extra 2? When it kind of plays out like that, you kind of wonder, all right, there might be a better way to go about this. Although actually I just read an article in The Atlantic about that too, where it's like, but at the same time, a lot of times at 18, you're not ready. Yeah. You're not, you're very young. It's true. And so to start your career, first of all, people probably aren't going to trust you or believe you that you're so smart that you decided not to go to college because like, oh yeah, okay, you decided not to go to college because you're already past that. Yeah. But yeah.
Well, if you tell them you excelled at weightlifting.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that was the story for me though. Really, is like I was really young because I came out to Los Angeles when I was 18, and I went to film school. And at that time, the film program was only a year. It was like a 12-month immersive program. And so I got out and I was 19. And I remember that, like, I didn't understand some of what was happening at the time, but a lot of it for me was like I had gotten, at a very early age, I had gotten really good at a lot of the technical parts of the craft. And what had to catch up for me was just like some life. Like I didn't, like I knew how to tell stories, but I didn't have stories to tell. Like I had this, and I think it took me a number of years to get from that place to actually saying, you know, I have something that I want to say, or I have something that I've experienced or observed or noticed. Because at that time, you're right, you're just kind of like, I know how to use a camera. Like,
yeah, which I think is huge. Is like, and like to really love it and to really be, like you said, just absorbed in the craft and really enjoy editing. Because I think it has to come in the very beginning. You have to enjoy it, and obviously down the road, it turns into work in a lot of ways, and it is really hard work to make a film and put it together. It's not all rainbows and sunshine, but you have to really, in the beginning, like you were saying, push through. Like how did you know when you were ready to make a story? How did you know when you were ready to make your first documentary?
Well, it was interesting for me. I started out, like I said, I'd gone to school for cinematography, so I started out in the cinematography world. So I was, you know, everything from pulling focus and gaffing to working as a DP and really helping other people tell their stories, which looking back was so, I'm so glad I did that path. You know, like it's interesting because I've turned my attention now to directing, but I'm really glad I kind of came up through that more tactical place, partly because of what I'm saying, you know, in regards to my age. Like I was able to watch a lot of other people work. I was able to watch a lot of other people make decisions, which helped a lot. And I directed some shorts, I did some stuff. And then it really wasn't until something really personal changed in my own life. And that was that my dad died in a really unusual, terrible accident that I was there to witness. We were on a bike ride. He got hit by a car, and in the wake of that loss and kind of in the throes of grief, which I felt totally unprepared for and totally ill-equipped to navigate, I began to work on my first documentary, which was called After the End, which is really where I went to spend time with different people around the country who had experienced loss in some way and had somehow come through it as a living, vital human being on the other side. Because I really did want to understand, you know, what does it take to go from this place that I was in at that moment, which was really tough. And so I spent time with people who had lost children and spouses, and you know, and the experience was, I don't know, it just kind of happened. Like it wasn't like I'm going to go make a documentary. It just was like I felt this need, like this visceral need to go do that. And in the process of doing it, it was unbelievably healing to me. It might have saved my life, honestly. And then to get on the other side of it and to put that film out and to have that film help other people, to have other people, you know, come up and say, I was like in the dark and I didn't know that there was going to be another, you know, version of tomorrow. That was just life-changing to me. I mean, it was like all of a sudden it was like my own curiosity and going on these, you know, that could, not only could it help me, but it could help someone else. Mm. That was just like a paradigm that changed everything for me.
I feel like in that situation, a lot of people would probably want to do anything but go deeper and think about these things and meet with other people who had experienced it. So the fact that you actually went out and did that, like you said, it did help to heal. What did you learn about death through that experience and talking with all these other people who had also felt it in different ways?
Well, I think I learned a lot about being okay with pain. I think like there's so much in the way that I had been raised, and perhaps a lot of us, you know, certainly living in America, that, you know, when you're hurting, when you're in pain for any reason, emotionally, physically, you're less productive. And so you're sort of taught, you know, you're taught in obvious ways and you're taught in really subtle ways to sort of like put that pain away, to minimize it, to move on, to get up, to,
right.
You know.
Well, we mask the pain too, whether
100%.
It's through coffee or alcohol, drugs. There's so many different ways that people try to mask it and not even.
And I think you're right. And I think that's what death does. Is death is one of those moments when you lose someone that's really, really dear to you. it's like you can't do that. Like, we all experience a lot of loss in our life all the time. And we all, if you just look back at your life over the last year, like you had things that fell apart. You had things that you tried that didn't work. You had things that you put your heart and your soul into and they didn't become what you wanted. Relationship, people that betrayed you, someone who hurt you that you trusted. And we sort of, just like what you're saying is right. We sort of numb ourselves to that, and to be a functioning adult, you kind of just, build up a certain level of callous. And then when someone dies, it's like those things don't work anymore. And it's this type of pain that is either going to, it's either going to destroy you, or you're going to find some place for it. And I think that was the difference. I mean, like all the cliches of like, you don't go around it, you go through it. It was like that thing of, I started out those conversations and making that film because I wanted to know how to fix it. Like, I felt like something had been broken and I wanted to put it back together. I wanted to get back to the person that I had been. I wanted to get back out of this pit of, and what I learned from a lot of those people was that it's like you just kind of, you make a space for it. Like, certain things linger. Certain things become a part of your story. Certain things are, there's not an easy bow to tie on them. Certain things just like are really disruptive and sad and difficult. And yes, you can get down the road and look back, as I've been able to recently, and see how they impacted your story in really beautiful ways. But also, like, it's okay. It's okay to just be in a place where you say, this is really hard. And for me, I wasn't used to problems that didn't wrap up in a matter of weeks or months. I was very used to having challenges. We all do it. Like, you articulate it. Like, you have a whole story. You have a 3-act story when you tell someone about a difficult thing. It's like, and then this happened, and then I overcame it. And then, but it was like that realization of like, this is bigger, this is more challenging, and this is an opportunity for me to grow, like really to become a more compassionate person, to become a person who's more open, or to become a person who's more closed. And I think even, doing those interviews, and I still remember it vividly, sitting face to face with people and sharing that kind of pain, like just being in a room with another human being. And this is where I think a camera is really powerful, knowing it's being recorded and having that space built, I think opened me up in a way that prepared me for a lot of what I've been doing since. And I think I got sort of hooked on those interactions you can have with another human being that transcend all the bullshit that doesn't matter. They just sort of cut through. And those places where people are just really themselves, like at a soul level, I think is what I've been looking for ever since. I think those interactions are the thing that feels most real and most exciting to me about all the work now.
Is it possible to prepare yourself for these moments that radically change your life?
That's a good question. I think if there's anything that can prepare you, it's just the realization and the normalization that other people have gone through what you're going through. I think what made me feel very lost and alone was that I had not had anyone in any of the ways life had been explained to me. This had never been brought up. It had never been like put on the table. And, I was young and naive and, invincible and all those things. But I think if there's anything I have a heart for as it relates to that topic, it's just trying to create more space in society to communicate stories where everything isn't working, or stories where the bottom falls out, stories where like you can actually create, I think, a lot more bravery in people, not by denying really horrible things might happen, but actually saying they probably are going to happen. And yet you're a human being, which also gives you this skill set and this tool set and this resiliency that you didn't even fathom that you had. So I don't know. Could I have not gone through it? No, I would have still gone through it.
Yeah.
I just hope that someone else going through it, as we all get more honest about mental health and about all these kind of like inner issues, I just hope it creates a space where people, when they go into a dark place like that, are at least able to say, wait a second, like I've heard about people being here before, and I've heard those people also get on the other side of this too,
It seemed like when making that documentary, it was the how didn't really matter that much to you. It wasn't like, how are we going to make this? How, like, what's the camera gear we're going to get? Like, where's my crew? It was like, this is a story I have to tell, and I'm going to use whatever means necessary to do that. But I am curious about how it did play out. And obviously you had these skills. You had a camera yourself. Was it just you driving around the country, or did
no?
You have
I was really lucky.
working?
I had a couple of people that I still work with that I love, who are very dear friends. I had a sound mixer, a guy named Michael Flo, who I'd grown up with in Atlanta, who was out in Los Angeles, and then a producer named Michael Russ, who produced that and the several of the next films after that. And we also edit together. So we did a Kickstarter for that, and we went out. I mean, it was really small. I forget what the budget was, but it was really, really, really small. I mean, it was basically like DSLRs and sound gear. And we basically just kind of reached out to people through blogs and, people who'd written about it, or people who'd been in, written op-eds, or we'd like get in touch with them, or, people that were big in the counseling world, but it was fast. I mean, it was when I look back on it now, those like beautiful things in your life that were they did come from a very gut impulse, because they weren't very planned. It was just like, okay, we need a little bit of money. Okay, we need these people, this equipment, and let's go do it. And we went and shot it in like, it was just like a month or two. Like, it was a very small film.
Isn't that crazy? Just how
looking back now, it's really crazy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, once you take on these adventurous projects where you're traveling all over the world, it can be a little bit more challenging to put together. But realistically, even with minimalism, it was a large part of it was filmed in about a month or 2 months, in terms of traveling around the country and filming Josh and Ryan on tour. And then the rest was like looking at the footage, because there is a kind of continuous process of looking at what you have, and then we definitely don't have enough. We have like 3 good interviews. We need to go out. So then it was just trying to find more and more interviews to kind of bring into it. Hey, we haven't looked at it from this angle. Let's get this person. And I even saw from like the True Cost, you go back and you interview people multiple times, because, hey, we actually should have asked them this, or there's an update on the story and we need to like dig a little bit deeper. So oftentimes these projects take much longer than 2 months. So
that's somewhere like sometimes that's also like I think about this all the time. I think about it as like the restrictions are really helpful.
Oh yeah.
Like on that project, it's like we just didn't have a lot, and we didn't have, you know what I mean? Like, it was like by nature, it was going to be a really small, very personal film, and that was the constraints.
Yeah.
I think it gets harder actually as you do more, because people give you bigger canvases, and you have a little bit, almost sometimes you have too much freedom. Like, you have too many options. And the hardest thing for me still now is like focusing back on, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I think the best example of this is Super Size Me. Morgan Spurlock, he saw it on he saw a commercial, or no, sorry, it was a news story about somebody who was suing McDonald's because the food was making them overweight. Comes up with this idea, shoots it over 30 days. The next year he's at Sundance. Because you have this constraint where you're like, I'm going to do this for 30 days.
Yeah.
And that's the entirety of filming it.
Yeah.
Those ideas to me make me, as a filmmaker, I love it. I'm like, all right, great. There's a clear start, clear end, and then we can kind of capture this journey. Not to say that other stories that are a little bit more fluid aren't worth telling. They're just more challenging, and they require more time. And they, like you said, sometimes if somebody gave you $10 million or $1 million, whatever it is, all the money in the world, what the hell am I going to do?
Well, and it's like the most important thing, especially for a documentary, is a really good premise. I mean, like, to the point that, like, so like for minimalism, you had a very clear, unique, you had a unique idea, but in addition you had the two of them, and it gave you like a vehicle, you know what I mean? Like, I've been wanting to make a film about faith and religion for a long time, but it wasn't until I started hanging out with Rob that I realized, like, this is the vehicle. Like, now I just found the way in. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, because even now when I think about new ideas or new concepts, it's not enough just to be like, here's a really interesting idea, I want to go vaguely explore. It's like, okay, that's the idea I want to get at. Now, also, in addition to that, what is the mechanism? So to your point, like, Morgan Spurlock could have made a very traditional, boring film where he interviewed health experts. And think how many ways there are to make that film.
That's the film that people would make today.
100%.
Right? Even though
increasingly so.
That's been out so long. You think about all the food documentaries that are out there.
So boring.
Yeah, I know. There's a couple that are great, and
Yeah.
they like really get you to think differently about what you're eating. But there's just so many out there. You've seen one, you've seen them all.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, how can you make a creative idea, and what are the characters that are going to make the story speak?
Well, and that's where like you also have to respect the fact that like filmmaking is a craft and it's an art, and I think the advantage of so many people having access to the tools is that we're getting all kinds of perspectives, which is phenomenal. And by and large, the positives outweigh the negatives. But the negatives are, I think, especially in documentary space, you can step over the fact that you're working in the art form of cinema. Like you're making a sensory experience for people. So to your point, part of that is just like starting with, this has to be something that people want to watch. Like, you know what I mean? Like this isn't a lecture. This isn't like an essay. Like this is a film. So to be a film, it has to be. So yeah, I mean, so it's like some of the stuff you did in the film where it was just like really beautiful or really thoughtful or really, that stuff just matters. And I actually am worried that increasingly some of that stuff is being, I don't know. I see a lot of stuff that is, I don't know. It just doesn't have that. It wasn't that intention wasn't taken somehow.
Yeah, I mean, like any film, there was a journey to get to the final edit, and many V's versions before we got to that final one. One of them along the way, I had steered a little bit off course. I decided to take on inspiration from other films I'd seen, like seeing Helvetica. What a beautiful film. What a really well put together idea. But then it's like trying to take that formula, and it's like, hey, let's take that formula of how they structure these interviews and weave from one story to the next to piece it together. Yeah. Let me just put that on minimalism. And it didn't work. It turned out really bad. Even though in the moment I'm thinking, you know, a lot of times it takes you to step back to watch it to realize when your work isn't good.
How painful is that? I want you to keep talking about, but how painful is that when I've had this moment 1,000 times where you reconfigure the whole cut because you have this idea, you have this brilliant thing, and maybe it came from another film or something, and you do it and you put all this work in, you're like, oh my God, and you sit down and you turn it on and you're like, here we go. Yeah. And like 2 minutes in, you're like, oh no,
this is garbage.
Everything about this is horrible.
Yeah, this is complete garbage. And that's, I like it. Actually, there's a couple instances throughout that this happened. So the one was, we were leading up to, we call it the Fargo incident. We were doing our first screening in Fargo, North Dakota, and we were going to play it to a live audience of like 150, 200 people. And this was the first time we were going to show it to anybody. This was like a couple months before we started to go to film festivals. And so it was really important to get that feedback. And, you know, for me as like a creative, it was my first documentary. I'm like, this is a big deal for me.
Yeah, it's huge.
And so I recut the film. I didn't tell any of my co-producers I was doing it. I was secretly doing it because it starts out where you're like, nah, just move this over here. I'll move this over here. Okay. And then like, and 2 weeks later, you recut the entire film. And then I sent it to them. They all sat down and watched it. It was like 8 of them, including producers and their significant others. And they kind of got me on a Skype call, and they were like, this isn't it, Matt. Like the other version was so much more powerful, was so much better. I fell asleep within 15, 20 minutes. They thought I was joking. They're like, this is a joke, right? Like you're fucking with us. And I was like, that would have been amazing. And I'm actually going to do that in the future. I'm just going to do like the cheesiest edits and then,
that's great
to fuck with them. But, so that happened. And then like in a lot of ways it was crushing. Cause I was like,
totally.
I thought this was it, but also not because they were just so in love with the previous version. Yeah. I was like, wow, that's it. It's over. Like I'm never going to be able to make any changes to this.
Yeah, right.
Because we got a standing ovation with that version of the film in Fargo. So that just kind of solidified it. No changes to this film. But then 2 months later, I watched that version of the film, which is the V1 at the New York, it wasn't the New York Film Festival, but one of these like small independent ones. And like it did well, like people liked it. It's hard to really gauge whether people like it or not when you're the directors in the room. People are generally very nice. But I had such a hard time sitting through it. I was like, oh my God, like I need to change this. I need to do this. We didn't go dig deeper here. We need to do this. I knew all these things I wanted to change about it. And then from that point on, it was me trying to figure out, how do I convince my producers? How do I change their mind that this is the right direction we need to head? And I had all the tools at my disposal to be able to cut and edit myself. So I think like obviously there's situations where if you're paying an editor to do it, these things need to be hashed out beforehand, and it's much more challenging. But I still had to change their minds. And that struggle, it was tough, but it was really in the end about following my gut and about what I knew to be the best version of this film I could make at the time.
And you feel like the final film, like this is your film?
Yeah.
It's that version.
It is the version. This is like V3.5, I think.
It's great.
But it started little by little, where we went like, all right, I'm gonna recut the first 10 minutes, and I'm gonna show you guys what the first 10 minutes are gonna look like. And
First 10 minutes are tough.
Boom. Yeah, they really are the toughest. And I don't think you necessarily have to start in the first 10, but for me, like that's just how it naturally went. And then I cut it together. They loved it. Great. Here's 5 minutes in the middle of the film about fast fashion. And then let's look at this scene. Okay, great. And then we do a few of these. Eventually they're like, all right, we need to see the entire film, its entirety, because they're great by themselves, but how does it all work together? And then half of the producers loved it. Half of the producers really didn't like it, and they wanted to go back to the original version. So it's still like, it was, it was a lot. It was a long time. And then it was like, all right, well, what don't you like about it? Let's look at each version side by side. Why is this strong? Why is this not? Why is this one emotionally captivating? Why isn't this one doing it for you? And then eventually we got to the bottom of the different reasons and the pacing and all this stuff, which wasn't working for them. And somehow we were able to come to amends, and we found a way to make everybody happy. But it was very yeah, right. But like that's the thing is like people watch the film and watch any film and they say, well, that's just the way it was going to be. Right. It just seems so obvious. But there's so many decisions. Like,
well, I always think about that. I always think about how like great choices always feel inevitable after the fact. And so like in a film, when a sequence is really working, it's because you can't imagine any song but that song, or you can't imagine any cut but that cut. But when you're the one sitting in the editing room and you have every choice, it's like a really, it's crazy. Yeah. It is. And I think that's a magical. It's cool to hear that story. I think that's the addicting part of the process to me is that time in post, and you're trying to figure out like what gives this film power, because maybe it's different than the thing that I set out thinking. You know what I mean? Like we've been wrestling with this latest cut, and it's the same thing. It's like, what is the thing at the heart of this thing that's making it go? Like what is it, and how do we find that and focus on that and cut away all the stuff that's just not? Because I do that a lot, where the thing that I thought coming in was going to be the big thing, people are like, we can lose that thing.
Yeah, you're like sitting back there. You're like, this is the moment. Here it comes. Yeah, like, come on, they didn't even get it. Like they're not feeling tingly on the inside. Yeah. It's so funny how the perceptions. It's also just very different from everybody that watches it.
Yeah, that's true too. That's a whole other. That's true.
Yeah, that's one thing that I heard. I think it was Neil Strauss said it. And he's an amazing author, written tons and tons of books. But he'll say, if everybody keeps telling me that they hate one scene or one chapter, I'll think about removing it. But if it just takes one person to say, I love it, that was my favorite part of the entire book. And then he's like, all right, something's there. Like not if you don't need to win everybody over. Cool. Yeah. But obviously there's something there if it really strikes people. And sometimes I'm so surprised when people are like, oh, that's my favorite scene, or that's like that interview really captured me. I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't even think about that. Completely.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So you put this film out there, and then
Yeah, we after the end we released. I remember we actually sold. We signed our distribution deal for After the End, and it was the next day that I was getting coffee, not far from here actually, and was looked down at the New York Times and saw the cover image of the factory collapse at Ronald Plaza, and I remember. That's why I was saying earlier. I think the process that we went through with After the End kind of opened me up. Like I think I was noticing a lot. You know what I mean? Like I was just in that space of like still a little tender. And I looked down and read this article about how this clothing factory in Bangladesh had collapsed and taken the lives of, at that point, well over 1,000 people, mostly women, some children. And I read in that one article that at the time of the collapse, they were doing work for major Western brands that I knew. And I also read that it was not the first, that there had been another factory collapse just before that, a fire just before that. Like it was just, and I just remember thinking like, number one, how in the modern world are we doing business in this kind of way that's leading to this sort of reckless waste, loss, lessening of human life? And also, really, in that split second, thinking, how have I never stopped thinking about where my clothes come from? And it was a chilling thought, being someone who grew up in a kind of middle-class American family where when you got new clothes, you went to the store and you got them and you brought them home and you wore them, and growing up past that, you looked at the price or the style, and not a whole lot else, honestly, if I'm being honest, had ever come into my mind. And suddenly, it just takes one thing sometimes in your life to like one window gets opened and you look through it and you're like, oh my God, like there's a whole world through this one window, and I took the article back to my producer partner that day, and we started doing some research that week. And I remember reaching out to people in different parts of the world, some of the people who actually ended up in the film, authors, activists, journalists, and just saying like, help me understand this story, like I'm like everyone sort of reeling from this one big incident, but like help me understand what's taking place. And by the end of that next week, I was convinced it was a film that I wanted to make, because it's sort of in one industry, which was the modern fashion industry, encapsulated so many of the things that I was really interested in, so many of the things that I was growing restless with and curious about. Suddenly, I mean, back to that comment of like the vehicle, it was like this one industry gives me a vehicle that I think we can use to look at all these other things.
I wonder why we don't think about these things and why we don't think about the clothes that we wear and where things actually come from. And I don't think it's because people don't care. I think it's just the path of least resistance. It's like it's so far removed from our lives that why would we take an interest? And sometimes we are willingly ignorant or naive about the companies that we buy from, because like they do such a good job at branding and showing like what great companies they are, or how beautiful. Like if the commercials are this beautiful, if the models are this happy, then it says something about H&M or whatever brand that you're buying from. When in reality, if you kind of trace back the roots to where this all comes from, it's a little bit darker than I think most of us would hope.
Well, and I think I have a lot of compassion for that, because I think, more and more, I think we're living in a totally new time in human history where this is the first generation in history that's been able to look at and measure the impact that we're having on the world in real time. Like we're the first generation in the history of the world that has to scroll through, stories of, subway stations or mosques getting blown up, on our way to see a text message from someone that we love. Like we're sort of inundated, I think, with information, and that creates like huge opportunities, obviously. And it also creates a sense of like people's lives are just busy, like they're full, and for no fault of their own, Like I really believe there was that quote that said most people are doing better than they think they are in their life. And I really think that most people care. I really think most people are genuinely trying to raise good kids and do good work, but there really is a limit that you hit, and there's a sense of like, I think every day we're kind of being asked to take on more and more, in terms of things to care about. And that was what I thought about when we started framing the film. Was I thought like, I don't want to frame this like another problem. Like I don't want to introduce another thing that you should feel bad about, or another reason you should have like Western guilt. It was more like, maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe I could frame this and I could introduce it to you as an extension of things you already care about. So like you already care about women's rights. You already care about the environment. Maybe I could just show you how this thing is connected to these other things. But also, going back to what you said about the branding, like these are highly profitable stories that are being told. And we're not living in a world that is organized according to like human needs or interests. We are living in a world that's organized according to profit, as you know better than anyone. And I think for me, that was almost like I had to go way into that to realize just how far that went. Like to realize we're living in a series of constantly competing stories about how we should organize our lives, what we should buy, what we should value, what we should buy into. And these stories are funded to the tune of billions of dollars. and especially in the fashion world where you're talking about like an image and a vision of who you are and who you want to be, and it's tapping into like all these things. And being lost in that story certainly is the health of the planet, and most definitely the most vulnerable people on it. So like once you open that up, it really is like taking a curtain and just pulling it back. And you're just, for me, I was just dumbfounded by what I saw on the other side of that.
Yeah, for me, the biggest impact the film had on me, it was just from almost a humanitarian level. Like it wasn't, a lot of people might be motivated to downsize or reduce waste because of the environment. But for me, it's like, you can't look at these people, and like you have some amazing stories in there. And the one woman stands out to me is the one that was the head of the union down, I think it was in Bangladesh or You just see people like that, and you can see like your sister, your brother, your neighbor, your friends, and you're like, this is an amazing person, and how can this be happening? Yeah. And like the fact that we're connected to this person as well. Yeah. I know I have friends and you know that are not minimalists and that shop occasionally, and I bet if I brought up the film or this idea, this concept, they're like, no, but I love shopping, right? And like, but if you actually hear the stories and if you see these people, and I think this is what an amazing documentary like yours can do, is I think everybody has compassion, and you can feel compassion for these people. And I think that's what's going to help move people to change. The one thing I was interested, there was a couple people that made the point in terms of, all right, like, so what do we do, right? That's the big thing in pretty much any documentary. What can we do to help? What can we do to change this? The one thing was changing the system. A couple people had mentioned, which is that's one of those things I'm very curious about, and like how does that take place? But I think it's got to come from the bottom up as well, right? Is that just like you see with organic foods? That was not a thing like 10 years ago. Nobody cared about organic foods, but then there becomes this demand from the bottom up. Do you see it from both of those angles? And you know, what can people do to make sure they're buying clothing and putting things on their body?
I mean, that's the ultimate question. We took some heat on it when we released the film, because the film, I was pretty adamant about the film not leading to a place of like, just text this number and buy this t-shirt. Yeah. I literally sat in a meeting with a distribution partner where there were people around the table who had watched the cut of the film, and they were like all offering their marketing ideas. And it got to this one woman, and she was like, I just think we ought to print just a ton of cheap t-shirts. Like we should just get, you know, and like as a way to get the word out for the film. I remember just sitting there being like, oh my God, like,
sorry,
nothing means anything.
Yeah, like what the hell? Nothing means anything.
But I think that's the ultimate question. What can we do? And I think there wasn't an easy answer. And especially when we released the film, I felt like this was one of those issues that we needed to just introduce. Like the service of this film in particular was just to say, hey, there is like something really significant happening that you're buying into, that knowing so many of you, I don't think you want to be a part of. And we need to collectively start to like think about how to reorganize this. And I think it also came from a humility that, you know, we traveled all over the world for this film, and you realize the scope and the extent. I mean, this is, you know, the most labor dependent industry on earth. This is an industry that records profit in the trillions. Like it's not like saying, you know, before lunch, we're going to figure out how to revamp the global.
Yeah, let's do it.
But since then, I think a couple things have happened for me. I think number one, first of all, just on a personal basis, I think this is something that you can do something about. And I think that is really empowering, because I think I interviewed someone who said something great to me. She said, you know, I don't want anyone to feel guilt, because guilt is the thing you feel when you've already decided that you're not going to do anything about it. And I think I was so drawn to this topic for the very reason that you do wake up in the morning, and, you know, as Martin Luther King famously said, you've touched, you know, so many parts of the world by the time you've gotten dressed and had coffee in the morning. And I think an awareness of that begins to lead you to the place of making choices. Like, you're not a slave to the system. And for me, going from someone totally oblivious, someone just totally oblivious, to where I am now, it has been a journey of buying a lot less. It's been a journey of that freeing up space, both financially and emotionally, to make better choices when I do. It's made me be someone. My wife and I have 4 young kids at home, and, you know, we're not perfect by any stretch, but it's changed the relationship to how we bring things into our life. And it's made us think about the people on the other end of that item. It's also made us think about the environmental impact on the other end of the item, and not in a paralyzing way. And I think that's what I would want people to know is like, it has made my life richer, not poorer. Like it actually has not been this pain, like this thing that I'm like, oh, like I'm just dying to go buy cheap, shitty clothes, but I don't.
Yeah.
It's actually been like, I like the stuff I wear more. I have more of a relationship to the things that I buy. I actually, yes, I have, and I hold on to things that have a higher quality, and I feel connected. It acts as a doorway to empathy. Like it actually, this sounds so simple, but like when I put on a piece of clothing in the morning and I know something about the story of how that came to be, it reminds me of that. It reminds me that I have a place in the world that's not just a consumer. Like it opens me up to the possibility that I make choices, and those choices matter. And it starts my day in a perspective. So first of all, from a very personal standpoint, just like all the things in our life, I think you can't underestimate the power of what can change you. Like I started out when I was younger, I was so focused on wanting to change the world that I've come full circle to this place of like, sometimes I think I have the experiences I have, not as much so I can like wield all this impact and have all this change, but like I walk away different. And when I walk away different, I start making different choices. I have different conversations with my friends. I'm raising my kids in a different way. And there's something very like small, but also profound, I think, about that. So I would say on an individual level, tons you can do. Start anywhere. Don't be perfect. Don't get hung up on. Start to think about the longevity of what you hold on to. Start to think about the quality. Start to think about the people talk about price per use. Some of those simple tools. Just start. That's an amazing road.
Yeah, my girlfriend used that as an excuse to buy things. It's like, well, price per wear. Price per wear. It's $400, but I'm gonna wear this thing. It's gonna cost $10 every time I wear it. But no, I think that the big thing though is like well-being and happiness. Is that and I think that's what connects with a lot of people is, and you mentioned it in your documentary, is that just because you're going out and buying these things, it's a very fleeting sense of happiness, if you want to call it, or a dopamine hit. It's just like eating dessert or eating junk food.
Yes.
And I remember back to when I first started making money for the first time, and not a lot of money, but enough money that I was like, oh, I can buy things now. And so what did I do? I went out to Kohl's and I had a shopping spree, and I bought like a fake leather jacket and all these like nice fancy clothes because I was an entrepreneur and I was a business owner and I was like trying to be a hotshot. And then I kind of binged out for a while. And this was actually right when I moved. So I graduated college with $97,000 in student loan debt. And I did the smartest thing I could think of, which was to buy a brand new car. So I'm living at home in my parents' basement with my younger 4 siblings with like $115,000 in debt. So now like I'm not paying rent. I have student loans, but I can still manage. So I'm starting to actually save up and have money. And this is before I discovered minimalism. So I like I said, I just go out and I just start buying stuff. I buy a flat screen TV. I just mount it on the wall. I do all these things because I was deprived of that from my whole life. And I thought that doing those things would actually make me happy. And they did for like 2 weeks. And then it fades away. And then,
interesting.
And then I came across minimalism. And for me, it was really more about this idea of success is because I actually came across Tom Shadyac, who he did.
I know exactly who he is.
Yeah, dude, he did an interview with Carson Daly.
Yeah.
Do you know that one?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, dude, I saw that. It was at like 1 a.m.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Dude, that's insane.
I specifically I specifically went to dinner and sat down with a friend of mine and like basically reenacted that whole interview after I saw it because it was that powerful. I hadn't seen the film. The film had not come out yet. Yeah. Like I was not.
Dude, that's wild.
That is wild.
Yeah.
That shook me.
That should change my life.
Yeah.
I was running around. I was like, guys, you got to hear this. You got to hear this.
Yeah, totally.
Like, he had everything and then he gave it up. And then now he lives in a trailer in Malibu.
Yeah.
And I thought it was the craziest idea in the world because it was contrary to everything that I had been taught in my entire life was that like he had everything that I wanted. And so it gripped me and it got my attention. And then it was just like the seed, right? So it wasn't everything. I didn't like become a minimalist there on the spot, but then it was a seed enough that when I started to read more about it online. I started to hear more about it. I was like, definitely, like, this is it. Like, this connects with me. I had a name. It was called minimalism. So I was like, let me just start to pare down my stuff. But it's just funny how, like, those ideas, like you said, it's the window.
It's powerful.
That Carson Daly, Last Call, was a window for me to be able to open my mind up to this new idea.
Well, isn't that amazing too? Like, one of the things that stuff always inspires me, because it makes me think. I hadn't thought about that for a long time. Yeah. It makes me think how much we're all building on each other's work too. Isn't that incredible? That, like, you have an experience where you go do something and you come back and you share it with us, and then it sticks, like, it imprints on other people. And then when they go out to make their thing, I mean, there's so many parts of what I make or what I'm doing that are specifically pages out of someone else's book. You know what I mean? I'm like, really, and I try to do it thoughtfully, but, like, I'm also really not apologetic about it. I'm like, I learned that from that source right there. Mm-hmm. And I just think if I combine that idea with this idea, then there's a new thing. And that's going to, you know what I mean? Like, that's wild. But that's, I mean, honestly, that too, the other side of your question, like the bigger system change idea, that was one of the big things for me. Was when we were making The True Cost, we were traveling all over the world. We were having this sort of out-of-body experience where we'd go back and forth between very rich parts of the world and very, very, very poor parts of the world, which, as simple as that sounds, that was a really new experience for me. And I think just the contrast of that, like, actually built up, like, just even in my body, like, it built up. Like, just to be in the same day, like, on a fashion runway in Paris or Milan or London, and then to be in a slum, that did something that I'm still getting over, honestly. But it also, I remember as we were making the film, we were having this experience, and I would come home to the U.S., and I remember thinking to myself, this story that we're living in, this system that we've created, this profit at all costs, this more and more and more and more and more, buy, this whole thing, not only is it in very real ways destroying parts of the world, it's not making us happy. And that was like that was what kept me up at night the most. Is I remember just having this thought, like, it would be one thing if we were living in this really egregious, like, living off way more resources than we proportionally needed, or, you know, all these things, if it was making us really happy. Like, if we were the most put together society in the world, if we were really whole and healthy as humans. But I think to realize more and more that we were not, that we were living on, like, fumes of addiction and a really false narrative that was showing its faded colors, and we were worn out, and we were, that to me, that is really what started that truer search for, like, what is the story that has led us to this place? And in uncovering that, and some of what we go through in the film is just that process of pulling the layers back and being like, we're living inside of a story that a lot of us have never questioned. And it is a story certainly built on consumption, but it's also a story that does not have a good end. Like, we're living in a system. And you talk to, you know, I could have the best free market thinker in the world sitting here next to me. Just, you know, markets are going to lead to, and I could ask that person, but what's the end game? Like, we're chewing up more and more and spitting out the remains. Inequality is growing and growing. Like, all these negative forces that we all agree on, we all can admit are increasing, and not just increasing, but, like, exponentially beginning to increase. It just made me go back and kind of look at, like, okay, how do we get here? Where are we? And then, how can we imagine a different story moving forward? And that's not like, I don't have the answer to that. I'm not trying to sit here saying, like, but I think ever since that moment, that's kind of been the driving force for a lot of my work is, what are the actual stories we're telling? What are the narratives that are on loop and repeat? And what are the ones that are leading to things that are very good for human beings? And what are the ones that are really dangerous? And what are the ones that are, like, holding us back from the kind of world that we should and maybe could have up ahead?
Yeah. Sometimes I look at my own circles and the people I'm connected with, and I get very optimistic. Because I'm like, because everybody that I know have heard of simple living, or many of them are paring down themselves. They're very connected with this idea of being very thoughtful and intentional about the things they consume. I think inherently, many of them know that it's not going to make them happy. Some of them are still fighting with their own drives and urges to still get that, even though they know it's not going to make them happy. They're like, well, let me just find out for myself. But when you take a step back and you do look at our entire society as a whole, it's it's hard to be entirely optimistic because we are still very consumer driven.
Yeah.
You know, every Christmas, every Black Friday is like the bigger than the one before it. Now Cyber Monday, and it's just becoming easy, especially with one-click shopping. Like it's way too easy now to buy shit and cheap shit. So I'm still like optimistic. I still think that we're heading towards the right path because, like you said, we are asking questions and we're telling stories that haven't ever been told before. And I think that if enough people get connected with these ideas, we are inherently compassionate and there will be change.
I think we're starting to see the end of one story. I mean, I think that's the good news. I mean, someone wouldn't have made your film 10 years ago. They just wouldn't. So I don't even think they would have made it. I mean, it's just really interesting. Like, we are in an accelerated, and I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing one story slowly reveal itself to be something really awful and really ugly, and something that's not neutral. Like, it's actually designed to do very specific things. It is designed to gather wealth for very specific parts of the global community. It's not just floating around, you know? Like, we like this idea of the market driven, just as if we're all kind of, is very specific. Like, Steve Jobs had that great quote where he said, you know, look around you and everything you see was probably designed by people, and some of it were not as smart as you. So like you can redesign it. Like you can, and I think that's the like tension that we're living in, is we're seeing the end of one story, but we're not seeing the beginning of a new one yet. And I think that's the thing that I think is going to grab a lot more people, is when we can transform from just, I think some of what we've been doing is like, hey, look at this thing. This is not good for you. Like, don't do that. Like, you know, get this out of your life. Like, that you're addicted to this thing, and like you don't want to be, and all that's great. But I think the next step has to be, what is the new story? Like, people are craving meaning. Like, you give someone a choice between an existence that is full of purpose and meaning and one that's not, and I think they'll choose the purpose and meaning path 9 times out of 10. I just think we're living in a time where, for a lot of people, they've grown up in a generation where they haven't seen that as an option. Like, so they've just picked the least bad option. They've just picked, like, I mean, even advertising is like designed to sell you on a narrative of something that means something. Like, really, like, it is imitating something so profoundly good about a hunger you have as a human being. It's just adulterating it into like a horrible place. And you wake up, like you're saying, you wake up 2 weeks later and it's like, it didn't do the thing I don't know. I just think that speaks to the fact that people, by and large, are craving something more meaningful. They are craving something that is not just like, how do we like stave off the worst parts of what's coming for us as a human race, but like, couldn't we still design something better? Like, I mean, it's like that moment in Truman Show where he's like, I want to be an explorer. And she's like, everything's already been explored. Like, I kind of feel like that sometimes, where people are, it's like we're living at the end of history. It's like we did all these amazing things and put these systems together and they're serving us well. And I think now we're starting to get to a place where it's like, no, the systems aren't serving us well. The systems weren't designed to serve human beings well. They were designed to do very specific things. Those things have consequences. And to your point, you know, a film like yours can criticize those or can take a chip out of that. And now I think it's opening up like, okay, what's the story moving forward?
Yeah. We have a lot of distractions and challenges along the way to find meaning. And one of them, which you pointed out, was advertising. One of the things that I wanted to include in the documentary, but I couldn't, just because it was too far along in the edit. You ever get these things that come up later on, you're like, I wish 100%. I could, like, I didn't fully tell that story in the way that I wanted to tell it, or there's an idea that I would like to inject, but it's just too late to do it. The one was Juliet Shore. She made an amazing point, which I want to know your thoughts on, because I still grapple and I don't really know whether I agree with her completely, but it was on advertising. And she said that advertising doesn't get people to buy more things or buy things that they wouldn't otherwise do. That's what our social circles and peer pressure do. So especially now with social media, somebody shares something on Instagram, that's going to be more likely to influence you to buy something. Advertising gets us to buy Honda over Hyundai, or it gets us to pick the different kinds of things. I think obviously it's not black and white like that. Like, advertising definitely, I think, has a huge push, but I wonder if it's more leaning towards her views in terms of, I'm just,
it's
like,
interesting.
what pushes our consumption. Like, that was one of those ideas where I was like, I was like, damn, like that's a really good point. Like, when I think about my own personal circumstance, that's how I feel.
But here's what's interesting to me about that, and there's a lot to think about there. But what it makes me think of is that the difference though in the things that were being sold as items that we use and use up and throw away. So like if you take clothing, we're talking about clothing right now. So if you take clothing, it used to be something that was advertised to you. You had choice between brands. It differentiated itself, as you're saying her point is. But you bought something and you bought into it and you held on to it. You repaired it. You maybe even passed it down. It was in your life for a long time. Now that advertising engine, that marketing machine is now training a generation of people to think about clothing as something that they use and use up. Almost, fast fashion, as you know, is that idea of like it's a disposable good now. That's revolutionary in the history of clothing. The fashion is a disposable good. And you could look across a couple different sectors and say that's happening in several. I mean, the Pope talked about a throwaway culture. Like it's a sense of moving away from things like, we're sitting at this table, which is a beautiful table that you bought, that you're going to like. That's one kind of purchase. Mm-hmm. And there is a type of advertising that will steer your choice on what kind of table you're going to invest in. Versus like the machine that's going to generate a bunch of people to buy a bunch of stuff that's going to come in and out of their life. And that's where I'm more critical. I'm more critical of like, what are the systems that we're inviting people to buy into? Like we got, there was a lot of controversy when the film came out, and that one of the questions was always like, why are you so, there's dirt in a lot of these supply chains. Like, why are you so adamant about fast fashion? And it was a model issue. It was a mindset issue. It was going from something that you held on to something that you throw away. And to me, there is ecological nightmares. There is human rights abuses that you just turn the pressure up on an already pressurized system. There's all these, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think it's
well, and sorry, and to cut you off, but it's also the using up, like you said, and Juliet Shore mentioned it in terms of kind of creating, everything now has an aesthetic. So you have a toaster now that's designed. That's also designed to go out of style in 2 years. When have we ever lived in a world where you would get rid of a toaster because the decor, it doesn't match the decor of your kitchen?
Well, that's where that's fascinating.
Because I have a really nice toaster, by the way. It's got wood panels on the side. I don't know if you can see it from there.
Well, that's what's interesting when I talk to my friends who live in different parts of the world. That's one of the things they talk about when they come to the United States. Is they talk about like when they come here, we don't just sell products. We, every lotion or soap or every minute used toaster, it's like it's going to change your life. It's going to change the kind. When you're making your toast in this toaster, it's gonna like that's not unique to America, but that's we have perfected that art so that it's not just like here's some available products. It's like every product is telling a story of you being the kind of person that wakes up in that kind of kitchen, and you have that, your wife looks like that, and your car looks like that.
To go against that idea as well, or to tell the other side of it, would be if you are just trying to buy a thing once, or buy it and like buy headphones until they completely wear out and then they're unrepairable, but you spend a lot of money on it, or whether it's a toaster, as long as I think it's okay to buy something that's maybe a little bit more expensive, that you know where it came from, you know that the company is ethical, and then you're going to hold on to it for a very long time. I think it makes sense, first of all, from a financial perspective, but also makes sense in terms of an ethical perspective.
And I think that's happening. I think people are wanting that. I think that's beginning to be... I was just at the United Nations a couple weeks ago, and they were doing a big summit on human rights and fashion stuff, and it was really fascinating to hear from different people in some major brands. And that was one of the things they were articulating, was like something is changing where people are more interested in buying things that have some kind of meaning to them, that have some kind of quality that is beyond. And I think that, in a hopeful way, that's some of what happens after we get through the moment of just more. You do kind of wake up the next day and say, okay, but if I can have everything, now what makes anything more worthwhile than something else? And the story of that thing can be not a small part of that.
Yeah. Let's take a little step back. I want to talk about the how of the true cost, because this was the most ambitious project that you had worked on up until that point. you said day after your first movie gets picked up for distribution, the idea comes in. What are the steps to actually making this documentary and getting funding and doing all the things that need to happen to actually get started?
Yeah, and I'll try to be as honest as I can, because it's funny, when you put these things out, there's such a tendency to tell the really put together story. You have the press version of the story. It's
absolutely.
And then we did this and it was a success. And then we did this and it worked.
Yeah.
No, so the story was, we were going to the premiere of After the End, the film that we just finished. And I basically put together a plan, and I sat down with some people who I had known growing up. And right before the premiere of After the End, I had a little private meeting in a room, and I just said, this is what I want to go make. I want to do this new film. And I basically asked them, I needed a certain amount of money. I can't remember how much it was. I think it was $15,000 that I wanted them each to take a chunk of. And I was going to the plan I presented to them was, with that money, I will go and do this really simple week and a half of travel, and I will film these initial interviews, and I'll put together a trailer to kind of encapsulate what the project is going to be, what it's going to look like, and I'll use that to do a crowdfunding campaign. The crowdfunding campaign will get a chunk of what we need, and then I'll use that momentum to go ahead and start, and then we'll raise more of the funding as we go on, basically. That was my pitch to them.
Yeah.
And that was really kind of what we did. We got that initial chunk. We went and started filming, and we created what would be the crowdfunding stuff. So we went to London. We spent time with Lucy Siegel, Olivia Firth, Safia Minney. Went to New York. We did some of that initial work. We pulled in some of the footage, some of the news stuff that was happening at the time around Rana Plaza. Created the crowdfunding campaign, and I think the crowdfunding, we did it on Kickstarter, and I think that was $70,000. Which is what kind of enabled us to keep going. And then from that point, it was hard. The funding was hard. Even after that, it was still hard because it was an expensive film. I was pretty adamant on the fact that it be global from the perspective of, I felt like these were really uniquely global ideas. It was actually, that's something that's magical about the fashion industry. It is one of the few things that connects the whole planet. And I didn't want it just to be a Bangladesh story, because I didn't want it to just be relegated to a Bangladesh problem. I really wanted to kind of have this contrast and this collage feel. And that's not easy, as you know. So it was hard too, because I think a lot of people, there hadn't been a film quite like this. And it's hard, maybe you had the same experience. It's hard when you're not doing something that's really, I actually had someone say to me, I'm not interested, but if you do a food film, come talk to, it's just interesting how there's these things.
Well, and the biggest costs here are pretty much travel, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I say expensive. It wasn't huge, but it was. Yeah, it was just the cost of travel.
Well, it depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to Joe Schmo, oh my God, that's huge. But I think a lot of times with documentary filmmakers or people in the industry, they have certain ideas of a couple $100,000. Okay, that's a decent budget, or that's an affordable budget.
Yeah.
Compared to others who might look at it differently.
For sure, no, it's true. And we took some of what we had. We started. And we would constantly cutting little pieces of what we were filming together. I remember the first trip we took after the Kickstarter campaign was we went to Bangladesh, and I remember we met Shima. I remember that. I remember we met Shima, and we had a local fixer journalist there on the ground who really that was one of the biggest challenges in every country. Was it's a strange thing to go into someone's country and say, I'm not from here, and I want to dig into some of the worst stories of what you're. So we spent some time getting allies around the world. That was a really powerful thing. And then once we'd get them on our side, we'd go into the country and we'd spend time, in Bangladesh, I remember we spent time interviewing, just talking to tons and tons and tons and tons of garment workers and in Dhaka, because I remember knowing early on, one of the few things we knew was we needed a character who was kind of emblematic of millions of people like her. And we met Shima. I remember she was the last person we met that day. And I just knew, I have that feeling with, you just know sometimes. I just knew. Yeah. And so when we came back from that first trip, we cut together a little bit of her story. And I remember thinking, that gave me a lot of confidence, because I remember thinking, there's just those moments, and this along the way, where you're like, this is going to work. Mm-hmm. As challenging as this still looks, as daunting as this whole thing still is, I know at the heart, this is going to be powerful, So we would come back, we would show those things, we try to raise some more money, and we kind of just did that all the way through.
Just kept going.
We really did.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way down to the point where like it was sometimes like one country at a time. And even in post, I remember even in post, we were still raising some of the money that we needed just to finish the film and get it put together.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize what it takes to make a feature-length documentary. Like you said, sometimes you just look at it and it seems straightforward. It seems so easy. But that's the one thing. The advice that I give everybody is just start small. If you're a filmmaker and you want to make a feature documentary, start out by making a trailer. And like you said, no matter what, you're always going to have to win people over, whether it's your producers or it's the people that are funding the project, or if it's the people that you're trying to interview. That's one thing we did. Like,
very true.
I was an unknown filmmaker at the time. Josh and Ryan had an audience. They were the producers as well as being in the film. So that helped us a lot, because they had a decent audience that they could say, hey, well, like they write for, whether it's 1 million people a month or whatever it is. But at the same time, when you're trying to reach out to people like Dan Harris and Sam Harris, who themselves, when you have a large following or your attention is at max capacity, they get these requests all the time.
Absolutely.
So for us, it was, hey, let's, shoot a couple interviews, do some, take some B-roll and some news clips, put together a short little teaser trailer. We'll put a teaser out there. Maybe we'll make a private trailer that we can just share with them and say, hey, this is what we're working on. That is like the biggest way to start to build that momentum.
Huge.
And that's the thing that you can do now that you could never do before.
Absolutely. No, that's really true. And that's well said, because it is tough. Getting to the people that you want to get to is tough.
Yeah.
And it is like a climbing on influence. Like it's it's really true. And I also like, I continue to have this very personal approach that's like, I just want to I want to act on the inspiration really fast. Like I've just found that I'm the kind of person that like when something hits me, like that article hit me standing at a coffee shop, just having that sense of knowing, having that sense deep inside of me that like I know I, for some reason, and need to go tell this story. I want to put it in motion. I want to get out. I always think about like when I go on a run, like I'm an amateur runner and I want to run as far as I can in one direction because I'll have to come back. Like it's the same thing for me with these projects where like they are so difficult. And by the time they end, they are so challenging that part of it's like, if you knew it at the beginning, all that like ignorance is bliss, you would know. Yeah. But the other part of it is like, it's what you're speaking to, not overthinking it, just being like, I know the next step. Now I know the next step. Now I know that. And I remember thinking that like, who cares if we don't have money for post? Who cares if those problems will be solved because we will have to solve them. Like we will make finishing easier and less costly than abandoning. And that's like, I don't know, there's a formula to that to me where it's like, thrust the thing into motion. Things that are moving are so much harder to stop, Yeah. Things that are just static. When I talk to people, there's too many people that walk around, and on my worst days I do it. You walk around and you talk about an idea as if an idea is just going to magically, but man, when you start to just put that thing into motion, you start to do those steps like you're talking about. It then begins to have the illusion of being inevitable. And that's like a magical quality, When you take ownership over your work and you actually learn the craft like you did, you have so much more power and flexibility. Because like you said, like there's no way that you couldn't finish the film. Like if I didn't know how to edit or shoot or do any of these things, or then you would be, you would have to really try hard to find somebody to work on a project for free. And anybody who's good isn't going to do it for free unless they're your best friend. Even then, they probably wouldn't. It gets a little iffy. So.
Yeah, it gets a little bit iffy. But since we have these skills, we've crafted it, we learned it. Even if it's not the big grand vision, and you're always leading into a project, you have these big grand visions and picture how it's going to look. And it's like, I'm going to have these beautiful like landscape shots before every city, and it's going to be this and that. And then nothing ever comes of those specific ideas because you just can't predict where a project's going to take you.
Which, by the way, the disappointment of that letdown, I think, is what makes you go make the next one. Yeah. I always think that if you were to make the thing that was like you thought it was going to be, you might just like,
yeah, like it was perfect. You're like, that's it. I'm done.
I really think. I mean, I always think that. I always think like there's that. Yeah, savor that feeling of what it can be in your mind, and then go make it. Go get lost. I mean, that is a good struggle.
Yeah,
and then come out the other side, and then all the things that didn't, then you go try again. It's like there's
I feel like we quickly forget the pain that we go through on these projects.
100%.
Because like
100%.
Even within a week of finishing, to like getting color grade and sound and everything done. Never again. I'm like, oh man, I couldn't even imagine starting a new project right now.
I always think about, and that lasts like 4 days. I agree.
Yeah.
I always think about, though, that's why filmmaking is so magical, because you have the seasons. Like, when you're in pre-production and you're thinking and you're drawing and you're writing and you're like the sky's the limit and it's like so wonderful. And then you go make the thing and you're like, you're getting diseases and you're not like, you're sleeping in airports and you're just it's grueling in a way that you're longing to be out of it. Mm-hmm. And then you're in post and you're in nice rooms that have air conditioning and you're eating out of like styrofoam containers. And by the end of it, you're kind of like, I want to get back out there though. Like it's it all feeds itself to me. I think that's what makes it so intoxicating.
Yeah. I think that's what's great about filmmaking specifically is that there's so many different aspects to it. And if you are a part of every process, which as a director you typically have to be, it doesn't get very dull for very long. Absolutely. So if you're working on pre-production and traveling around the country filming, or traveling around the world, and then like you said in the studio, I had the same thing when I was doing client projects, is that even though a lot of the stuff I would do would be solo, it was nice to have the mix up. Like I like my solitude, I like being able to edit by myself at my place, and then to go out and collaborate and meet with people and crew and talent. That to me is a great mix that doesn't always, I don't think a lot of professions actually have that, which is great. Yeah. What advice would you give to people who are looking to start out on a new project? Like something that's big that they haven't, they got the idea, but they haven't really figured out how to take the first step forward.
Well, I mean, I think break it down into pieces. I mean, I make a lot of lists. I'm the kind of person that like I do a lot of my thinking on a legal pad where I just have to get this thing out of my brain. So like if you have something that you're really passionate about, if you have something that you're a story that you really want to tell, I think just kind of like what you were just doing, like break it down into pieces. It'll become a lot more actionable if you can just get it down to like the beginning parts, and don't be afraid of like step 9, 10, and 11. Just focus on the first few. Like that's really liberating. I also think I remember getting the advice really early on that I've constantly thought about, that when you're first starting out, you won't be as good as other people, but you could do yourself a big service by doing something that like do something on a topic or in an area that you have such a deep sense of knowing, that you'll get moral like authority from the fact that you have had the lived experience of something, and that will help outweigh some of what you're still learning in regards to craft and structure and some of those things. And I think about that, like when we made After the End, we had no money, we had so many things stacked against us. And frankly, I was really new at the documentary thing. So like for me, structuring a whole feature, like, I wasn't as good as I am. I'm better at that now than I was then. But the thing I had going for me was I really knew the heart of what it was we were doing. So I think that for a lot of people, that will give you it'll give you like this immeasurable advantage if you can have your first thing be, it sounds like a lot of what minimalism was for you, have it be coming from a place that's so rooted, that's so personal, that you can't help but get it right. Even if you fumble a little bit, you're still going to be in that spot that people watch and they say, that's the real deal. That's not someone trying to be something they're not. That's like, and I think everyone has that. I remember growing up thinking like, I grew up north of Atlanta. I remember like just wishing I was from like the Bronx, or I just remember thinking my story was so boring. I remember thinking like there's nothing in my experience that was unique. And as time goes on, you just realize like, man, I have lived through certain things I know, and I think that's true for anyone listening. There's things about your story that you don't maybe realize, but if you're thoughtful about it, if you listen, really look at your life, you'll see those things that are like tools. They're your best tools, Yeah,
I think that's probably the best advice that you can give. It's not like the practical how to do this, do that, but it's finding stories that you can't not tell. And when you find those stories, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how it gets made. It doesn't really matter whether you do a crossfade here or if it's a straight cut. Those tiny details will work themselves out. They're the smallest problems that a lot of times we get caught. A lot of times we get caught up on these things though, and we distract ourselves by these tiny little details. Like, I can't record a podcast from my apartment because like I don't have soundproof rooms, and there's going to be a little bit of an echo there. And like those are the things that like for me, like they come into my mind. Yeah. Sometimes they win. Most of the time though, I'm like no, like I need to actually just create, keep making, keep pushing myself forward, and then tell stories that you can't not tell.
Well, and that's what I think is so empowering about the work you're doing with this show. Is I think that really is that's people get hung up with. I get hung up with that a lot, and it has to be like. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an author, and he was talking about how when he meets people and they're like, I might write this book. He's like, well, then you're not. Because if you might, then like it's way too hard. And what you just said about like find a story you can't not tell. It's like I always think about that now. Having gone through it a few times, I think like it is such a difficult endeavor that at the beginning I have to be absolutely floored by these ideas. Like the curiosity has to be so high. My passion has to be like off the charts because it's going to have to get me through all the way to the end. And quite frankly, I'll have moments now where things will come on my radar or my work's transitioning a little bit where, you put stuff out there just as you have and people bring stuff to you, and that's kind of a new thing. And I have to sit with ideas sometimes because I think like sometimes they go in the pretty good category. My wife helps me a lot with that, where we just are like, yeah, that could be a good film, but that's not enough. Like that's enough to get me through like month 2, but like, man, there's a point down there on the path where like that's going to fizzle out if it's not that thing that has to be. And like what I love about what you're doing too is like I love taking the curtain down and having more honest conversations about the process, because there is so much of it that is like a great film is a great illusion. It's like anything creative or artistic that it is made to make you think that it is accidentally excellent. By its very structure, it is designed to, make it feel like it just happened, like it just rolled out of the can, like it's just here it is. Like, and I think it's cool. I love hearing and I love talking to people like you about all of those other moments because they are fascinating. Where it's like, and then this thing failed, and then we tried this film, and that fell apart, and then this failed. But you just like, I don't know. It's like the more you know that's part of the process, you're like, okay,
yeah,
cool. Like other people, but for a long time it was kind of like, and maybe that's kind of what you're attacking with the show here. It's like for a long time it was like just straighten up and to the right, like success and then success and success, and you don't talk about anything that didn't work out just the way you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's because that's what we push out there, and we try to put our best selves out, whether it's even if it's a topic that's very hard to discuss. We do want to make sure that, all right, if I'm going to put this film out or if I'm going to put out this website, I want to make sure that it's really well thought out, really intentional, which is, I think, the right way to go about it. But at the same time, you don't see the full story. You don't see the edits and the re-edits. And in a lot of ways, you can't show that in a final product, in a final film. You can't, just because you shoot hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage, and then there's no way to unless somebody's going to sit through and watch everything with you, to really fully understand the context of every single scenario.
Totally.
And that's one of the biggest challenges as a filmmaker, is to say, how can I be keep my integrity intact, keep the integrity of the film intact, tell these stories while also editing them down significantly.
And I think, that's true. And I think that's what I said earlier about like the complicated thing in my life has never been the desire to be a filmmaker. It's like you have to, like at your core, you have to be the kind of person, whatever medium, whatever type of work you're doing, you have to be the kind of person that loves on a visceral level what it is you're doing. And I meet people sometimes and I think maybe they're not in the right capacity. Like I hear this sometimes. I hear this story of struggle of like, how difficult it is, and I think like maybe they're playing to like someone else's script. Like maybe they're following like an imaginary role that they, because I would say like you're in the right spot when it is like really hard, when like everything is not working, when it is not going according to plan, and yet somewhere in you is like, but I'm in the right place. Like I'm, what I mean by that? Like I feel like I'm there's a piece like on a very visceral level that like, this is the fight I want to be having in my life. You know what I mean? Like we're going to have a struggle. I want this struggle. Yeah. Like I really, I don't know. I think that takes people time. And I think even for me, like I've had to kind of wear different hats and figure out like what part of that process am I best at. But man, those are the best is when you're saying, I know it's going to be hard. Like I'm going in now, just knowing I'm signing up for something that is like really difficult. Yeah. And yet I love it.
I never even thought about that though. It's because there are people that are struggling right now, but they don't believe in the path that they're heading down. So it makes it that much more difficult. It makes it that much more dire. Yeah. But it's so much easier to take on the challenges and the struggles because no matter what, everybody has problems in their life. And without problems, life would be incredibly boring. But when you know in your heart that you're heading in the right direction, even if you don't know which direction you're headed, that I think is so important and something that you can't replace.
Yeah.
All right, cool. You want to do quick questions?
Yes.
Quick questions, not quick answers. So feel free to elaborate if you want. But I just kind of put together a few questions here directed to help people who are just getting started out on their journey or they might be hitting some roadblocks. Do you have one book that's made the biggest impact on your life and got you to think differently?
I think The War of Art was the one for me.
Ooh, Stephen Pressfield?
Yeah.
So good.
I think about it every single day.
Really?
I don't think I ever go through a day without thinking about it. That idea of there being like resistance, there being like an actual battle. Like when you go to make something that it's not like you pick the right medium and then you got on your path and you pick the right project and that then it's like gonna sail. It's that like you wake up in the morning knowing, even with all those things that we've just been talking about in place, knowing that there is just a very real battle inside of you, that there is a battle between facing the thing that you're supposed to be making and all the other parts of your brain and all the other parts of you that just want to take a detour, take an off ramp, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's two other books that are kind of connected to that, similar thoughts on writing by Stephen King, who he writes about just sitting down and writing every single day. Like he'll write on Christmas, his birthday, his wife's birthday. It doesn't matter. Like, he writes every single day to fight the resistance. The other one is Deep Work by Cal Newport, which I just finished.
I haven't read.
Amazing. And it's funny. Like I thought about you when reading it because when trying to find you online, not very easy to find. Don't have social media from what I can see, right? I imagine that's intentional and by design. What was the reason? Was that because you didn't want that distraction or was there another?
No, I think it was just a distraction. I'm really easily distracted and I also just like it just took up too much mental energy for me. It like, I began to realize that I'm the kind of person that like I need to let stuff like well up inside of me so they almost like combust. And if I always have a way to like let off the steam, like if I always have a way to like get just a little bit out here and there, it takes away from some factor, some drive that motivates me to say, for some reason, I'm the kind of person that like I don't need to say something every day. Like I want to say something every year or two. And I want to have it really put together in a certain way.
Yeah, but there's this
and it's not good or bad. It's not right or wrong.
But there is a misconception that today in 2018, you have to be connected on Twitter and Instagram. Like if you want to be a successful creative, if you want to be an entrepreneur, run your own business, you need to be on social media. And I love the fact that you're not on there and proves that you can still tell really important stories.
It's like that fear of missing out. That's like the most visceral part of our brain. I mean, but it's the same. It's a journey. It's the same part of me that doesn't go to Hollywood cocktail parties anymore. It's just like, I just hit a point where I was like, I'm done believing in the idea that what's lacking from my opportunities is being seen by the right person. And I'm much more in the like seat of what's lacking from the ceiling on my opportunity has everything to do with the quality of my work. And I have to own that. And for me, like I have a very simple job. I have a very simple thing I'm trying to do in the world. And so to tell these stories and get better at it and better at it and better, and to be in it for the long haul, to like really, really, I don't know, that just says something about where my energy has to come from and where it has to go. And there's other people, I mean, people like you, people like, well, a lot of friends we've just been talking about have all sorts of, they have a reason to be doing it. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, I've recently decided to get more intentional because it does act as a bit of an addiction, especially for a lot of people, and for me even, where if the first thing you do when you wake up is check your Instagram feed to see how your post did from the day before, that I don't think that's a healthy habit. I think that we need to be more mindful about how we are using these technologies. And for me, it got a little bit out of hand because this past year was really when I started the podcast and started to push my own original content. So unknowingly, that just kind of crept up on me.
Totally.
And I was like, I felt like I had to check, had to respond to every comment, had to do all these things. But then reading a book like Deep Work, I'm like, take a step back. I'm like, what's the most important thing? It's just making amazing work that can hopefully inspire and influence people.
Totally.
And a lot of times I don't need to hear people's feedback. Like when you make a film, you get some close confidants to give you feedback. A lot of times you have to go with your gut though and figure out which direction you want to head. So I've been more intentional, and one of the ways I'm doing it is just scheduling posts.
That's cool.
So I'll do... so I emailed you this morning, and because I check my email once a day and I check social media once a day, and it's like scheduled at 7 a.m. So I'll like say if I have a podcast, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful. I'll be like, hey Andrew, by the way, I just want to let you know I'm not going to be on email the rest of the day. If you need me, here's my phone number. So you can do things like that, and then I don't have to be like, ooh, I'm going to check. I want to make sure. Oh, is he running late? Oh, let me check the email, and then. I do that for everything. There's certain things you plan ahead. You might miss some opportunities, but that's totally fine. If somebody needed me to respond today in order for that to happen, probably wasn't worth getting into anyway. That's true. But it's been a lot more productive for me. I'm actually more comfortable being bored and doing nothing. So I I don't need to hop away from the edit to like go on Reddit and see what's happening on CNN or whatever. It just makes you that much more focused on your goals, and I think you become more patient when you're not always tapped into it.
Yeah, I think it's well said. I really do. Especially if you're making something creatively, I think you have to have that space. Because even if it's not social media, for me, it's like picking up a magazine or reading a newspaper. It's like I'm still fighting that fight of like, no, like it's okay to like wrestle with those ideas that I was reading about this morning and just to think about them for, you know what I mean? Like
there is a degree to which you can be better at producing as a creative, or you can be more effective. Would you rather spend 40 hours editing this trailer, or would you rather spend 20 hours, but like be more mindful about every hour you put into it? Just because you're creating really great work doesn't mean that you couldn't improve it in subtle ways
I think that's true. And I also think there's seasons, I think like there's seasons that come and go, and I'm beginning to be more okay with that. Like we're going to start doing press for this new film, and there will be a period of time during which my routines will be very different and my days will look a little different, and I'll be, and that's okay. Like now that I've gone through that a couple times, I'm like, okay, like I know what that is. I know what that takes. I know what that does. I know why I'm doing it. And then I get on the other side of it and I have, you know what I mean? Like I think that's also been part of it for me. Is I think a lot of people fight to get the perfect day. I used to do that all the time. Like, I would just be like, tomorrow I'm going to get it. Like,
I'm going to nail it.
Every single thing. And just realizing every week's different, And,
and to be okay with the days that you're not as productive.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
What drives you?
I think a sense of curiosity, but I think more specifically a sense of somewhere inside of me is the unwavering belief that we can create a better future. I've never been okay with the world that we've been handed. And I think at moments it breaks my heart. At moments it makes me angry. At moments it makes me restless and frustrated and impatient. But always I think I just have this feeling like we're just on one step of the journey. Like we are alive at a moment of tremendous opportunity and all that. But the important part is just that like we're one step in a journey. Like all the different pieces of history have built to give us the world that we find ourselves in today, and to not wake up in the morning and want to be about challenging and shaping and offering ideas for how we could take the next step forward is like insane to me. It's the only thing that's really interesting to me is, yes, context for how we got here. I love history. Yes, real eyes and ears to see where we are right now. And that takes deep, deep observation for me. But then what do we do with it? Like how do we take from this moment? How do we take from what we've learned and what we now know? And how do we shape something better moving forward? Because if we're not, what are we doing? Like, if we're not doing that, like, I don't really know why any of us are doing anything. But if there is the belief that we could make something better up ahead, if there is the belief that we could continue to tinker with this thing, we could continue to, that's like tremendously motivating to me.
Well said. Where do you go when you're feeling doubt?
I feel like that's like so much of my life.
Right.
My car, my house.
Oh my God, all the time. Yeah, or who do you go to?
One of the things I think I do is I go to people. There's only a couple of people who know me really, really well, and they're people who've been on the journey with me for a long time. And I think they do a tremendous job of affirming to me who I am and where I am. Like, I've had some experiences, even in the last couple of years, some just tremendous hit the wall failures, and both professionally, the very small team that I work with, as well as personally, a couple of relationships in my life have been people who have just said, this doesn't change anything. You failed. You had a really good intention to make something great, and it didn't work out the way you wanted it to work out. So what? Like, so you're still you. We didn't love you because of the work. We love you because of you. That, that makes me emotional even thinking about it. I think that's what keeps me going. And I think, to be totally honest, even in the filmmaking process, a couple of the guys that I work very closely with, I think that's the only reason I got through. I think it's the only way I pushed through. Even when we're making The True Cost, there were some really, really, really difficult parts of that journey. And just, not just physically, but just emotionally. I didn't think I realized till after the fact just how much of a toll it was taking, and some of the things that we were experiencing. And it was really, really powerful to have people that just say, yeah, like, I'm here too. I see it too. And on the days that I was really down, they were up somehow. The days that I was up, they were a little bit down somehow, So for whatever that's worth, I think about that a lot. I think about whoever you are, whatever you're working on, find a way to do it with other people in some fashion. Find a way to, like, crush that stereotype of the solo artist just struggling. There are people who want to help you. There are people that want to go where you're going. There are people that really could add to what you're doing. There's people you could learn from. There's people that, like, could learn from you, and, like, find a way to do that. Because without that, I look back and I think, man, I would be really lost, I think.
I couldn't have done it without my co-producers, without having a team there for so many reasons, like just not being capable, not having the connections, not being able to execute what they were able to bring to the table. But also the fact that, like, it's like a team effort. Like, I grew up playing baseball and I missed that through college. And as I started to work as a professional, especially working as a solo entrepreneur, I crave that. And like, now I play softball, and like, I do some things for fun, and you kind of get that in. But I also noticed I got that from working on a team through this film. You push each other further. You help each other get over doubt. And most of the times you're not feeling doubt at the same exact time. And if somebody is, then you tend to overcome it yourself, and it helps you to push them. And I think that creating a team, no matter how small, and you know what, even if, like, you don't have people that you can find that can work with you right now, you can find friends that you can bring along on the journey and say, hey, can you help? Like, every once in a while, if I could come to you for advice, that would be really 100%. Helpful. There's a lot of people out there, and people that are willing to help.
Yeah, well said.
A couple more here. What skill have you leveraged in a way that you think others haven't?
I think earlier on than some people, I think I came to a very real awareness of what I was good at and what I wasn't. And I have a very small skill set. Like, it's very limited. Some people have, like, wide range. I have very, very small range of my skill set. And it has a lot to do with being like the spark, being the person who believes, and being the person who can, because of that belief, like, convince other people, whether that be team members or financing or, whatever it is. Like, I'm very good at being like the heart of the project or the work. but I'm not the smartest person at a variety of the skill sets it takes. And I think very early on, I just became aware of how much of my energy I could spend trying to get better at those things versus I could partner with people and trust people who were really, really good in those areas. And I think if there's anything I've done well is I've trusted people. I really have trusted people who are better than me. And I'm not just, that's just a factual statement. There's a guy who I work with as an editor and producer sometimes who, he genuinely is one of the smartest people that I've ever known. And he, from a technical standpoint and a narrative standpoint, he's just really, really good. So I could struggle along and like do something solo in my space alone, or I could connect to him. And from the beginning, I've connected, and there's just that collaboration, that rub, that push and pull, that like, I don't know if other people haven't done that. I assume other people do it too. I just think I am very, very confident, increasingly so, about a very, very small list of things that I offer and that I bring to the table. And everything else is sort of like, I need to find that, you know? Like, I'm not going to pretend I have it. I'm not going to go learn it. I'm just going to be totally honest, and we're going to build a team accordingly. And I think, from a filmmaking perspective, like, there were people that I was in school with who, you ever meet those people? I'm sure you've worked with them where you're just like, I don't think you're cut out to be a filmmaker, in the sense that like people annoy you. Like, it's almost like you should have been a novelist. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, seriously, like, you should be a painter, because filmmaking is messy and it's collaborative and it's a team effort, and it's you're passing the ball back and forth, and you're constantly, and I just happen to love that. I think I that's part of what's so intoxicating about the process is like, that's not an annoyance to me. That's actually like part of the thrill.
All right, 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. One thing people should read, watch, or listen to before they go to bed.
I'm reading Walter Isaacson's book on Leonardo da Vinci right now, and it's just blowing my mind.
He's an amazing writer.
Oh, he's so good. And I think for anyone that listens to your show, and anyone making things, anyone in the art of creating anything, I think it just, oh my gosh, it's just really, it is like one of the few things in a long time that has like changed my perception of just how much capacity human beings have, and just how much you can. I also relate to it, and you would too as a documentary filmmaker, because one of the things he did so well is he like combined and borrowed from several different categories, and Isaacson makes the link to Steve Jobs in that, but it's that interesting thing of like math and these things over here, and science, and then art, and then where he'd connect them is where he'd like find the magic, And I think that's like, it encourages me just to get outside of my space, and that's what I think that's what I would recommend to anyone is like, watch or read or listen to something that has nothing to do with what you're doing. Like, we live in Los Angeles, which I love dearly, but I'm amazed at the amount of people that are so focused on the thing that they're doing that like they kind of just, everything they consume is in that like vortex of Hollywood, and that kind of and I find the most inspiration when I just veer like way outside of my required reading or required and just find something that's like, it reminds me all over again of like why the whole thing is interesting to me to begin with.
That's great. And last question, how should people connect with you online? They can't, right? I just realized that. I was like, I couldn't even connect with you online. I had to go through a friend.
That's a great question. There's if you really want to write me a note, if you send a note to info@untold.la, it'll get to me. And I actually really am working on a website. So I think this spring I'll have a place for the first time that kind of puts my work together and organizes it and makes that process a little easier. Yeah,
and more importantly, check out The True Cost or After the End. Those are 2 great documentaries. Andrew, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
That's the podcast for today. Andrew Morgan, what a legend. That podcast went pretty long. It was nearly 2 hours. Most of the time I keep these to like an hour and 15. But when we get into that zone, I don't want to stop because I just feel like those are the conversations and the stories that you guys are going to get the most value from. And these are things that I create and put out there, and it's evergreen, as they say in the business. So it's always going to be up there. It's always going to be online. You can go back to this podcast, listen to it down the road. People who pick up this podcast a year from now can go back and listen to it. But Andrew Morgan, amazing. I can't wait for The Heretic. I'm really excited about that. If you haven't seen any of his early documentaries, The True Cost is a good one to start with. Anybody who's in alignment with the minimalist message will really get some value out of that one. It was it's a heartbreaking film in a lot of ways, but eye-opening. And like Andrew said in our conversation, one of my favorite things about what he stands for is that he's not trying to make you feel guilty. He's just trying to open your eyes to some new stories, and maybe you can take that baton and help him tell the next version of the story. One more pitch for questions. Send your questions to the podcast. I'm really excited because I'm starting to get some of these questions in. They're really thoughtful. They're really good. They're questions that I haven't yet asked on the show. So if you think that you can bring a question to the table that we haven't yet heard, a topic that we haven't yet covered on the podcast, I would love to hear from you. Record a video on your phone, nice and simple. It doesn't have to be pretty. You don't have to be pretty. I'm not. So you can record that video on your phone, email it to hello@mattdiavella.com. If you don't know how to spell my last name, hello, HELLO @mattdiavella, MATTDAV as in Victor, ELLA. Nice and simple. Get as detailed in these questions as you want. Provide the proper context. I just ask that you keep them under 2 minutes. Send those in. Email me, and we'll get you on the air. Exciting. All right, that's it. That's the podcast for today. See you guys next week.